She walked into the room carrying an expensive gift. Every eye was focused on her. Soon it was as though a spotlight was following her. She toured the room and greeted everyone, and was greeted by everyone. She was the belle of the ball. As she made her way around the room, though, she came to another. When she came to the other woman, she took the very expensive gift she was holding, knelt before her, and handed it to her. Everyone in the room was shocked. It looked like she was the focal point, and she was merely bearing a gift to someone else. The focal point. It's difficult when we enter a room not to assume that we're the most important person there. Ego sort of demands that of us. That's ego, not spirit. It sort of makes us project that we're pretty valuable. I didn't get to tell you about Marcel last week. We had other things going on. I appreciate you bearing with sort of the long service for communication last week. It'll be short today. But I do want to tell you about Marcel. Marcel was from Jamaica. He'd gone through Chicago and had married a girl from TCU that was working at Burlington Northern, making 6 figures at Burlington Northern. They quit to go run a family business or be apprenticed into a family business in San Antonio. So Marcel, my Jamaican Chicagoan connection, is the one on Thumbtack. And in San Antonio, Thumbtack is the source you use if you need to hire someone to unload your truck. So we had a truck that we moved from Dodge City to San Antonio with all of our youngest daughter's goods in it. And I had contracted with someone, this ethereal person on the cloud out there, to unload a truck at 1 o'clock on Monday. And I hadn't heard back from him. And so I got a little bit worried. So I finally texted this number that I had and said, can you confirm that you will be able to unload the truck at 1 o'clock on Monday? And he texted back promptly, we'll be there, David. Which is a very good way to get a truck unloaded, I found. But about 10 minutes till 1, I got a text that said, I'm waiting on a fella. He's running a little late. We're going to be a little late, but we'll be there. Don't worry. So about 1:30, Marcel shows up with Daniel. I want this to sound right, so maybe if I say it this way, it won't be racist in any way, I hope. But with Daniel and a white guy. I don't know the white guy's name, okay? I don't know his name. He was a guy. Marcel assumed that he was too important to unload anything. He owned the box truck of his company. He didn't own my box truck. He just brought people to unload it. But he began talking immediately and let me know that he owned the company and he didn't unload stuff. And so he starts talking. And he's talking and talking and talking. And I'm paying by the hour. And Danielle, oh, not Danielle, it's Daniel. Daniel is unloading a truck. He is unloading a truck. 3 flights of stairs, a long landing in the middle. You'll know how those apartments are built. Daniel was smart enough. He went up the long flight of stairs, then a short one, and then across the landing and handed them to the white guy. I'm sorry, I don't know the white guy's name, but he handed them to the white guy, and the white guy made the last 2 short parts of stairs and into the apartment. Daniel was moving 3 times further than the other man, 3 times faster than the other man. The other man was dragging badly. So I began to get concerned that I wasn't going to get my truck unloaded before someone passed out on me. And it wasn't going to be Marcel unless he ran out of breath talking, because Marcel was talking. He knew how to tell stories. But he was too important to unload a truck. Sort of off-putting if you're paying by the hour. But Daniel was a mover. Found out he'd been moving for 15 years. I said, man, you've got to sit down and rest. He said, oh, I learned to rest while I'm moving. I watched him about every third load. He took a very light load, but never stopped. He just kept moving. Boss says he's moving, but he's resting. Smart man. I mean, a smart man. I said, well, how did you learn to do it? He said, I've been doing this for 15 years. I said, well, you're sure moving. He said, well, I got out of the hospital yesterday at 6. Daniel had gotten out of the hospital from dehydration from moving someone else the day before, and he is unloading my truck in San Antonio. It's an awfully long story for me to try to make the point about Marcel. In his talking, before he's very far deep into his conversation, he says, 10 years ago in Chicago, when I was 23, I thought that selling marijuana was a good way to make a living. And it was lucrative, but it wasn't near as lucrative as selling cocaine. So I added cocaine to my sales repertoire. So now I find out that I've got a drug dealer from Chicago unloading my truck. But he has this to say. He says, you find that out from me and we're okay. Someone else tells you that and you've got a problem with me, right? I said, you're right. He said, but if I tell you up front who I am and what I'm about, then you understand that. He spent 5 years in prison, come out, married this girl from TCU, was doing very well, working very hard, being very diligent in his business, not moving much stuff, but answering the phone a lot. I worried that a moving business would be a really good way to sell cocaine, but I didn't mention that to him. Decided that would not be what he would want to hear. Marcel was a unique character. The point I want you to get from him is all the stuff that he'd been through, he still felt like he was too important to do some things. Christianity is about humbling ourselves, about being willing to submit ourselves for the good of others, to help others, to serve others. So there's a little brief story I want to tell you out of Genesis chapter 14. In Genesis chapter 14, we have Kedorlaomer, which is a long word, who is a king who for 12 years has been receiving taxes, tribute, from 5 kings in the Dead Sea Valley. Now, Kedorlaomer and his 3 compatriots live all the way around the Fertile Crescent at about, well, even east of Ur of the Chaldees, where Abraham came from. So they've come a long way now, but the folks in the valley decided not to pay their taxes. So the king that has been receiving monies comes to collect his money. Now, this is in the day of city-states, where you didn't have large geographical regions of nations, but city-states, and there were kings over those. And these 4 kings from that part of the world had gotten together and were collecting taxes from everybody along the way. But there'd been a slight rebellion, and everybody sort of decided they wouldn't pay their taxes. So he begins to fight people all along the way and defeats everybody he comes to. Everybody he comes to. Now, in chapter 13 of Genesis, Abraham and Lot their businesses had become so large, their industries, their cattle, their sheep, that they couldn't pasture in the same place, and they had to separate. And Abraham had told Lot, you make up your mind where you want to go. You choose a direction and I'll go the other way. It's on you. Lot looks over and sees this sort of green valley along the Jordan and says, I'm going to go down there. And so he goes down and begins to live in the city of Sodom. Well, everything's going good for Kedorlaomer until he decides to attack the 5 kings in the bottom of the valley. He actually does go ahead and attack them. And the kings of Sodom and Gomorrah, they fall in the tar pits. There are tar pits around the Dead Sea. They fall in the tar pits and die. So Kedorlaomer goes into Sodom and takes all the people and all their stuff. All the people and all their stuff, including this fella by the name of Lot. That's where he messed up. He took the wrong hostage. Until that point, everything's cool. Everything's fine. Not a problem. But he took the wrong hostage. And there was one fugitive that got away that shows up at the Oak of Mamre. Mamre is one of the Canaanites. But that's where Abraham's living at the moment. Abraham, you won't believe what happened to Lot. This king came from all the way over there, wiped out the whole city, took everybody off with him, all their goods, all their stuff, and he took Lot too. Have any of you ever seen The Magnificent Seven? Or The Seven Samurai, where everybody flees to the hills, but they still just keep taking all the resources. Now that's what's happened. Everybody fled for the hills, but they took all the resources. And he messed up and got Abraham's nephew, Lot. So Abraham got with his 3 friends from the Canaanites. He goes on the warpath. He is after them. Notice what it says in verse 13 of Genesis 14. A fugitive came and told Abraham the Hebrew. Now he was living by the oaks of Mamre, the Amorite, brother of Eshcol and brother of Aner, and these were allies with Abraham. When Abram heard that his relative had been taken captive, he led out his trained men, born in his house, 318, and went in pursuit as far as Dan. Now, Abraham's got some resources. He's got allies, but in his own house, he has had 318 fighting men born. So he has his own mini army. Now, I don't know if he'd heard of Kedorlaomer or if Kedorlaomer had ever heard of Abraham, but Abraham is on his tail. He's on pursuit. And he's got his guys, and they catch up with him north of Dan a little ways. In verse 15, he divided his forces against them by night, he and his servants, and defeated them and pursued them as far as Hobah, which is north of Dan. Which is north of Damascus. So they've gone halfway around the Fertile Crescent. We're talking a major campaign. And he brought back all the goods and also brought back his relative Lot with all his possessions and also the women and the people. So Abram, he's not Abraham yet. Abram saves everything, gets it to that point. Verse 17. After his return from the defeat of Kedorlaomer and the kings who were with him, the king of Sodom went out to meet Abraham at the valley of Shaveh, that is the king's valley. And Melchizedek, king of Salem, brought out bread and wine. Now he was a priest of Most High God. He blessed him and said, "Blessed be Abraham of God Most High, possessor of heaven and earth, and blessed be God Most High, who has delivered your enemies into your hand." He gave him 1/10 of all. That's not real clear when you read in Genesis. When you go read in Hebrews chapters 5, 6, 7, it's very plain that Abram is the one that gives 1/10 of the spoil from the battle to this guy that comes out from this city. I want you to look at what his name is. And Melchizedek. Now, Melchizedek, according to translation, Hebrews tells us, is king of righteousness. Zedek is the word for king. He is Melchizedek. He is the king of righteousness. That's his name. King of Salem is his position. He is the king of the city that becomes Jerusalem. That's Salem. It's before Jerusalem is even Jerusalem. He is king of righteousness, king of Salem, which in Hebrew is shalom. It is peace. He is King of righteousness, King of peace. And He comes out to meet Abraham. And Abraham turns around and hands him a tenth of all the stuff that they got in the battle. Remember the girl that walked into the party with the gift in her hand? And everybody thought she was the point? Only to find out that there was someone more important than her in the room? All this story is here, showing you that Abraham, God's servant of faith, is given a great victory because of the power of God and the work of God in His realm. He is our ancestry.faith. That's going to be our preaching series through the fall. We're going to look at people of faith who we are in the likeness of, that we follow after. And Abraham is the great father of faith, but he turns around and tells us how great Melchizedek is. He takes a tenth of the gift and gives it to this character. Look what it says about him. Now, Melchizedek, king of Salem, brought out bread and wine. Now he was a priest of God Most High. That amazes me. We pick up our Bibles, we begin to read. We're introduced to Adam, so we read about Adam. We're introduced to Noah, so we read about Noah. We learn something about Abraham, and we start to, the lens of history and the lens of Scripture begins to follow them very closely. So if we're sitting in the movie theater watching the movie, we're assuming that they're the most important people. The minute that we assume that, we forget that God is God of everyone. That God is doing things in the world in large ways, in massive ways. That as we begin to focus on Abraham, there's this guy who is a priest to God Most High, who is king of righteousness, king of shalom. He is the king of that area. And he's the one that is honored by the man of faith. Ancestry.faith is Melchizedek. He's the king of righteousness, king of Salem, king of peace. And he's the one that everyone in the audience should say, ha ha, we thought it was Abraham. Abraham's our hero. And Abraham walks into the room and doesn't even presume that he's the most important person there. He just led a major military campaign, got his nephew back, got back all the stuff that had been taken, all the women and all their possessions, is coming back to deliver them to their 5 cities that are there, and he pays tithes to Melchizedek. Now, Melchizedek brings out bread and wine. It's a smart move if you're trying to be sure and honor the guy that just beat up the guy that just beat up everyone else, right? It's a good thing to remember. Abraham just took down your enemy. So it's a good thing for him to be on your side. But when you go to acknowledge him, you find that you are acknowledged as priest of God Most High. How many of you have ever been guilty of telling God how He has to do stuff? You can't do it that way, God. That's not how it works. And God says, I'm sorry, folks, but my picture's just a little bigger than yours. My influence is a little wider than you think. I'm doing stuff all over the planet right now. I'm not God to the 25% of the people who have heard the word Jesus. I'm God to everybody on the earth. The 75% that have never heard the word Jesus. I'm their God too. I love them and I care for them. And I long for them. And I haven't forgotten them. The minute that we begin to get this selection process, we assume God's finished with them out there. No, He says, I'm blessing you to be a blessing to everyone. That's your purpose. I want to bless everyone. I'm not blessing you to be exclusive against everyone else. I'm blessing you to be a blessing to everyone you meet. That's your job. Not exclusivity, but propagating the blessings of God into the larger world. That's who you are. I've got people that you don't know about. You remember Jethro, Moses' father-in-law? A little later. He is the priest of Most High God in Midian. God's got priests all over the place. Well, I thought just the Levitical people were priests. No, God had priests a long time before that. Technically, Cain and Abel were serving as priests, right? They're making sacrifices, offerings to God. God's been using people in ways beyond our knowing all the time. So in our Ancestry.faith exploration, I want you to be impressed with this fellow that you meet by the name of Melchizedek. Because our father of faith says he's greater than I am. And God agrees with him. And Jesus comes and is a high priest in the order of Melchizedek. Sometime we'll look at Hebrews more deeply. He's a high priest in a unique way. In a different way. Just like Melchizedek was. But I want you to be remembering. Here's your take-home this morning. I think it is take-home time. Y'all ready to eat? It's take-home time. God is at work in our larger world. I want you to be sure and see that right off. God is at work in our larger world. He's doing things we don't fathom, can't grasp and understand. He'll use us in His world, but He is not limited by what we perceive. He's bigger than we think. Now be sure to say that with me. He is bigger than we think. And by that I mean He's bigger than I can think. He's doing things way outside my thought process. We must not assume we're the most important people in the world. The church has often been guilty of an attitude of arrogance and pride because we often assume that we're the most important people. We're the people that have accepted that Jesus died for us. That's a great place. Don't forget that Jesus died for everyone. It didn't make you special. You're special because you accepted it. Don't get me wrong. I'm not discounting your relationship with God, but I don't want you to think Jesus died for you and not for everyone else. He died for them too. And that's the message that we need to be sharing. When we go throughout the community, we need to be sure that we are not perceived as those holier-than-thou people that tell everybody, you ought to come to church with us. No, we want to be an attractive place to go to church, but not on that basis. This is not the place where you get your life right and come here. This is the place where you come to get your life right. And everybody in town can come and get their life right here. All of us have come, and some of us are still working on getting our life right. We're still trying to get it right. But we're trusting His righteousness because we have a great high priest who is in the order of Melchizedek, the king of righteousness, and the king of peace. He makes peace between us and God, the king of shalom. So Jesus wants to be king of the world, not just king of the church. But He doesn't want to be king of the planet. Satan offered Him that, right? He said, no, that's not what we're about. And then He reminds Pilate, if my kingdom were of this world, then my servants would be fighting. My kingdom is bigger than this world. So if you want to blow your mind, don't just assume that you're the most important person in the room. There are people in the room you can't see. There are angels watching what we're doing right now. There are principalities and authorities in the heavenly places that are looking at your example of Christ right now. If someone comes to be baptized in a moment, angels are going to rejoice because they see it. God is not only doing wonderful things in the world, He's doing wonderful things in the cosmos. He's a big God, doing big things, inviting us to share in them. Ancestry.faith, do you believe in the God that is that big? Maybe you've come to a place where you want to join that stream of faith. By one Spirit, we will all be baptized into one body. The Holy Spirit baptizes you into the body of Christ. The baptistry is prepared. It's even a little extra warm today, so if you needed some incentive, it's a little extra warm. Think about your relationship. Maybe you're one of those who thought you had to be right to be here. No, be here. Accept His righteousness, and He'll show you how to be holy. He'll empower you to be holy. Maybe you're struggling with sin and you need us to pray with you and over you, that you'll have more victories over Satan than defeats. We will gladly do that with you. As together we stand and as we sing.